This is the Forbes Books Podcast, conversations with amazing humans who are impacting the world of business and beyond. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila. Today I'm sitting down with Astrid Soto, a visionary entrepreneur, impact investor, and strategic advisor with over 15 years of private equity experience. Named one of the most influential women in mid-market M&A by Mergers and Acquisition magazine, Astrid is a trusted advisor to family offices and startups and offers valuable insights on business best practices while passionately advocating for women and minorities in leadership positions. Her philosophy emphasizes progress over perfection, making her a true innovator and thought leader in today's business landscape. Hey, Astrid, how are you?
I'm doing great, Joe. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. So I want to start with our backgrounds, which are very similar. We both have families that came from Spain, but we are very different in terms of the way we think about business. So my parents were immigrants, and they're all about working for the man, grinding 5 days a week, getting that paycheck every couple of weeks, saving up money, saving up enough to buy a house, and then, have kids. And that's what they considered happiness. But then there's your side where the entrepreneurship bug grew. To me, and I always joke with a lot of folks I have on my podcast, is like, I don't get entrepreneurship. To me, it's like, why would you do that to yourself? It seems like way harder than just getting a job. So tell me about the entrepreneurship bug and where it started in your family.
Gosh, the stories I could tell you. I guess I could start with, at the age of 12, I was given a forklift to be in the warehouse with the family. My dad at that time, was working heavily on the import of marble in the US. And I saw him day and night going to the warehouse, working at all hours. I would go to the warehouse, see all this movement, people. I would get inside the containers. They gave me the vending machine sort of procurement component where I would go and collect the coins, and I would have Becky roll quarters and Susie roll dimes at a very young age. So I got that sort of bug very early where I looked around and I said, well, I have to build it. I'm not going to go get a job. We do it ourselves. And so I got a feel for that at a very young age. And I think I was never the same after that. There was never an option of being a worker bee at somebody else's office. And that entrepreneurship bug was instilled in me since I was very young. And I'm very much that same little kid that was in the warehouse running around, getting inside the containers, trying to open up pallets today.
Yeah. So I'm a Gen Xer, and I think I might be a little older than you, but I always felt like as a Gen Xer in the 80s, if someone used the word entrepreneur, the joke would be, oh, so you're unemployed. So when did you understand the gravity of that word? Because it's obviously taken a different meaning. We now revere entrepreneurs. They're sort of like the people that aspire to. We used to aspire to be CEOs of companies. Now we aspire to be entrepreneurs, people to build things. So when did you realize that the importance of that word?
So I think I never grasped what my father did at a very young age. And I think because of what he did, and I'll sort of get into that a little bit, that ethos that he created in our household of building things and working for yourself was sort of the framework that I was raised in. He went to Rice University and took an entrepreneurship program in 1985. And so when you grow up with someone that travels the world, is trying to make their own path, pave the world, and I'll get into my mother a little bit, who was working in the 80s in Spain in tourism. She's like the original travel influencer. She's been everywhere. They opened my eyes to the world is your oyster. You can do anything at any place. There's no limitations. And you need to go and figure out what that is. And so having those two kinds of parents, where my mom also reinvented herself in her 40s. She always wanted to be a doctor. When I started driving, she said, I'm going to go try a new career. And I'm going to become a nurse. And she did. And so when you grow up with people that don't sit on their laurels and are always looking to change, evolve, learn, and try new things without sort of fear, you grow up a little bit fearless. I did take a traditional path for a while, but in the process of, I need to learn from the best in order to be able to build something that is best in class.
Wow. That's awesome. And I know we'd probably have to do a series of podcasts to go through the number of lives you've been through and the things you've done. But can you talk about that sort of virgin voyage, like that first entrepreneurial venture and what you learned from it?
So I started my first project. I was almost finishing college, and my father said, you need to do something that's going to be very hard. It's going to make you realize what it's like to work in the outside world. And I said, okay, what is that? He said, cold calling. So he got me a job with the Spanish Chamber of Commerce because I had done my senior project around food. I'd been in the business. It was just sort of the natural progression of my life. Even though I wanted to be in fashion, he said, no, you need to try food. So I did this consulting project where the Spanish Chamber of Commerce, they bring in companies into the US to do sort of exploratory visits. Are there supermarkets that can take our products? Are there distributors that are willing to? And this is before, when people really did meet face to face, and talking about early 2000s where it was very much about handshakes in the food space still, and it wasn't as insular as it is now post COVID. And so I spent a month calling to get a wine company in, a frozen seafood company in. The hardest work I've ever done in my life, because you get so many no's.
Oh, yeah.
But that really taught me how to angle. I have to get to a decision maker, maybe not the full boss, but someone in between that has some skin in the game, that's willing to take a risk. And if I talk to someone too junior, they're not going to push it up the pole. And so you learn these little things that later I didn't realize how valuable that was going to be for fundraising, because fundraising is the hardest thing that anybody is ever going to do, because it's many more no's than yeses. But that was sort of my first go at, oh my gosh, you get a lot of no's, but when you get a yes, the gift that is a yes, where it's like your entire world opens up. So that summer really changed how I viewed raising money, talking to companies, getting a feel for things, where it's like you get to make your own schedule. And if you call 300 people in one day and you get a bunch of yeses, you made that money. And if you just sit back and get crushed, then you're not going to make anything. So it really gave me a feel. And that was sort of the first job that I was like, I can actually control my own future if I actually work really hard.
Wow, that's awesome. Great story. And, I want to flip that to the side of raising funds from the other perspective, because you also got into the VC world. And for many people that I've spoken to over the last 4 or 5 years of doing business podcasts, especially when it comes to females, I think the venture world, I think there's some like ridiculous stat where like it's 80% or 90% of the funding goes to male founded companies. And when females go into meetings to meet potential investors, it's usually like 10, like usually, I hate to say it, white guys sitting at you of varying ages. And the difficulties are they're there, and don't seem to be going away anytime soon. So can you tell me about how you fit into this space, because you went from the fundraising side to then actually into the investing side. So what did you see from the ground level?
So fundraising, I spent time fundraising at MGH, which was under Peter Slavin's reign. It was just one of the most world-class hospitals in the country. And I got a taste for fundraising, where I was like, why can't I raise more funds? We're saving kids with cancer. Who are the donors? And I found private equity. And that's what I said, I can't beat them. I'm going to join them. And I'm going to go full circle in bringing money back into the space. That brought me into more of the investment world, where I got a peek as to how funds are raised, what these private equity guys, how they actually work with LPs, as I was on the investment side. And then I went to New York. And that's where at 28, I raised a first-time fund alongside a very well-known Hispanic family. And that was the biggest trip of my life, because one, I didn't realize how complicated it is to get people to give you money at that scale. But I also didn't have an appreciation as to the frameworks that exist. Like, if you're women in business, they want to put you into the emerging manager programs, full stop. Most of the guys in the middle, where most men raise capital, they're looking for these specific track records of people that were at either consultants before or were at a bank before, and then they went into private equity. There was such specifically defined paths that when I went into finance, it was like, we don't know where to put this Spanish woman who literally told us in her interview she didn't know what EBITDA was. And I was just so hungry and absorbing so many things that people were like, she kind of has her own track. And it's one of the things they told me when I left Audax. They said, we really are looking at people differently and the way we hire differently. And I was like, look, thank you for the appreciation. You're never going to change the way you hire. I know that I got in and skirted in somehow, but the concept of fundraising for me was the no's you're going to take a beating, and you got to just keep going and go inside your network. And I realized I actually went to school with a lot of families, and I knew a lot of the people that were the fathers or uncles or people that were investing. And so it was one of the opportunities to go to my friends and say, I've never asked for anything, but could I talk to this family member? And it's very hard to cross over in that concept, where from a friend to capital, But it became friends of mine saying, oh my gosh, you're the only friend I have where my parents are going to be so excited to meet you because you're so substantive. You actually know what you're talking about. You are actually doing some very interesting things, and it's going to make me look good. And so it opened up this way of connecting with people that I've known for a very long time, applying skills that I learned from a very young age of just taking it and keep going. Because once you get a yes, the world is going to open up for you. And so it taught me the stamina. I did train in sports when I was younger for the Olympics. So I think that discipline has been built in, where no pain, no gain. And I think sometimes in a negative way as well, where sometimes you need to feel a little pain to feel like you're doing something. And definitely fundraising encompasses that in many ways. But the learnings of my first job of getting the no's, talking to the senior people, that was so instrumental when I was doing fundraising many years later, where I didn't just go and say, I don't know where to start.
You talk about you being a rarity, being a woman in there, but how about being a Latina woman? How rare, were you like the pink elephant in the room? Like what was it like for you there?
And this is one of my favorite topics because I'm partial owner of a women's group. I was on many women's boards. I've worked with a lot of women. And this was probably one of the things that set me most apart is I was one of the only women in the room. I was the only Spanish woman in the room, certainly, and the youngest by far. But I saw it differently. I said, I'm this rare person that everybody's like, who's that? I use it to my advantage. I think the problem where today is you've got these women that are picketing feminism. Everybody has a right to be and to believe whatever it is they want. But I think, and this is the way I've been very successful, is if you're the minority, try to become as close to the majority for them to open the doors for you so you don't have to push through them. And so I got close to the men. If they had somebody, if it was a woman or a man fighting them or yelling at them in the office, or I had somebody screaming, I was like, they're going to have it too. So that's how I got closer to my peers, because it wasn't about man or woman. It was, we were all kind of growing and building together, and we were all kind of going through the same processes. And what I think a lot of women sometimes think it's personal, it's about them, or sometimes they kind of don't want to attach themselves to the rest of the men because they're the only women in the room. I think it's the complete opposite. Use them as champions. Have them help you open those doors. And for me, having a mentor like Jay Jester, who is probably one of the most recognized names in the middle market today, I was always very honest with him. And I said, look, I want to succeed and I have no problem being the only woman in the room, but I need someone to help me open those doors. And I think when you come in that way, it's very different.
You mentioned the pandemic, and I want to pick this thread here because there was that shift to virtual remote work. And I feel like, there have been studies about this where now the young people that are coming up don't have the opportunities that you had to be in the room with these men, or regardless of sex, gender, whatever, it was, at least you were in the room. Now, when you're in a virtual world, how do you build these network connections? How do you get a chance to show your real self and show the skills that you were able to show? Like, you came in and were like, who's this girl? Like, you were able to do that because you got in the room. A lot of people nowadays in these companies that are going more remote heavy, or at least all remote, how did they break through? What kind of advice do you give to the next, the Gen Zs, the Gen Alphas that are coming up, before we know it, in terms of how to be the Astrid Soto in their world, where they're really pretty much almost like handcuffed by technology?
So I think this is one of the greatest lessons of each generation, is you have to figure out how to navigate your new normal. And I think the problem is everybody gets so stuck to what they know, and uncomfortableness is very hard, but uncomfortableness is equal to growth. And I think what a lot of this new generation is struggling is that things have shifted drastically very quickly. And it's hard because change is hard on everyone, because biologically we don't like change. But I think that's where the immense opportunity also lies. And I have to figure out, how do I keep myself in these rooms? How do I keep having people open doors for me? I had to work through problem solving of the puzzle that was provided to me. And I think the puzzle that is provided to the younger generations today is very different than mine, but it doesn't mean it's not solvable. But it's going to require different skill sets and different ideals and different ways of framing things, where now everybody can have a podcast. Anybody can be a voice. Anybody can set themselves apart if they truly want it. They can have a YouTube channel. They can do. So you have to find a way to brand yourself where you create visibility for yourself in a new way. And there's many of avenues available to people. They just have to do the work. And what I think is very different between our generation, I'm a millennial, and the generation that's coming is, I think there's a level of work that is hard to do. And I think I worked 98-hour weeks. I slept under my desk and I had no problem. I didn't come in to Audax telling them I knew everything. I was the opposite. I said, I don't know anything. I need you to teach me. And I think that the younger generations, if there's a little bit of humbling, they're going to have so many resources given to them that I think they can't even fathom what is out there and accessible to them because of technology, but not as a hindrance. And I think if I were to give up one piece of advice to any young person is you could literally be an army of people if you learn how to use AI tools to your advantage. What I would have done as one individual coming into the workforce today, if I had AI tools to call on, to make presentations, to write better copy, to work and flush out ideas, to work through Excel, you are a one-man team now if you learn to leverage AI, where maybe remedial work isn't necessary anymore for you, and you can actually add value because you come in with fresh eyes.
I love that. Although I will say, though, because of this technology and the almost obsessiveness with it of just being all part of your lives, the younger generations are not having the Astrid Soto level of EQ or soft skills. So how about that part of it? Because that's the thing, like it's really hard to develop soft skills and EQ when you're behind the screen or looking on a phone or using AI. How about a little bit about that?
So I think that's the key. And I think you just nailed it. I think for me, it's about AI because I have the EQ skill set so built in, right? So I'm trying to complement things like, I don't like to sit in Excel models all day. I am an investor, but I'm not going to lie to you. That's not the skill set that I enjoy. That's not what I want to do 9 to 5. I want to go talk to people. I want to go do BD, but because it was an intrinsic skill that my parents used to make me sit at the dinner table, at the lunch table for hours, talking about all sorts of topics. So if I were to tell the second piece, which is one is AI, the second is the EQ component, and how do you actually get yourself to be seen because you have enough gravitas to attract, not to chase, is you have to develop skill sets that are going to help you look at people in the eye when you talk to them, which is one of the things that to me, when I meet and interview kids that might have 4.7 GPAs, they don't look up. And so that is go do an improv class. Go do something that's going to push you. That's what I'm looking to do now. Because it's sort of, I think, the next layer of really helping me think on my toes. If there are so many things available to you, to young people out there, but it's a matter of, and I think Elon Musk talks about this all the time, create your own curriculum. I've been building my own curriculum in life forever. I am a forever studier in life. And I think that's what you have so many things available, YouTube, MOOCs, you've got master classes, go take them, but take things that are going to make you stand out, make you show yourself in new ways alongside AI. And that to me is a force to be reckoned with.
That's great. And, there's this really tired phrase. I'm not sure if you're as tired as I am, but be comfortable with the uncomfortable. It's way overused now because the uncomfortable is different for everybody. Because, we talk about the coddling of younger generations. I wonder, how will they ever be comfortable being uncomfortable? Because they've been raised in this world where the second that you're uncomfortable, you've experienced trauma. You know what I mean? That you're already jumping a few chapters in the book. Any thoughts on that?
So I'm a very spiritual person. I'm not that religious anymore, even though I grew up very Catholic. But my spiritual guru is Michael Singer. And Michael Singer is not about spirituality in the way that most people see it as in religion-based. It's more about the individual voice and making sure that you're more comfortable within self, regardless of what's happening in front of you. And so what I think a lot of younger generations just don't have, one is their ability to have core values. And I think this is what sort of that 7 habits of highly effective people really talk about.
Sure.
And it's that tug war between character and personality principle. The younger generation, sort of millennials down, they live in this character principle persona of if I'm happy, everything around me will be fine. And if I'm okay, but if you don't have core values, when you are uncomfortable, when you're going through difficult situations, which the bigger things that you try to do, the more uncomfortable you're going to be inevitably because it's the force of life, the equal and opposite reaction. If you don't have intrinsic values built in, where you have some sort of credo that you live by, you are going to be shaken at your core every time. And what does that mean? You're going to have an ego death every time you go try and do something because you have not built in the value system that is going to help you navigate the storms. And that's sort of what I think is really important for people to really flush out today is, what do you stand for?
You tweeted a while back about comparison is the thief of joy. And I feel like we're in this world where the comparison traps are just all around us. When I was younger, it was like, if you saw them on TV or if you were like one of those young people that read newspapers, unless it wasn't as in your face as it is now, where you pick up your phone and there's 600 apps where you can compare yourself to other people, whether it's a LinkedIn, whether it's a dating app, whether it's just regular old Instagram or TikTok. Did you have that struggle about falling into that comparison trap?
Oh my gosh. I think now I can tell you with full confidence because I'm very comfortable in my own skin. I've probably been the biggest people pleaser in life. I've always wanted to be the good girl, the person that always seemed happy and okay with everything. And you sort of keep all that in. And at some point it bubbles over and you don't want to be around people because the mask that you've created is so far away from the person that you are that being alone is easier because it's not so draining. And so post-COVID has been a revelation to me where it's been, I want substance. And if you can't offer substance to me because it's superficial, I don't have enough time in the day for you. And I think that is what's shifted in me is having that intrinsic value system built in where I finally looked at myself in the mirror and said, you studied all these books, now you got to live by them. And so it was a pivot into, you can be a forever learner, but sometimes, those who can't do teach. I want to be a doer. And so it was applying these things because I looked around, I said, I have my family, we're all safe, we're all okay. For the most part, my friends all, made it out of this. The world is very different. I want to really be in control of the people that are around me and the people that take my energy and suck my, before it was like, I want to be friends with everybody. And you can't. If you're not willing to be disliked because you have not built in that core system, and if you don't have the courage to not be liked by every person that you meet, you're never going to be happy, ever, because you're always going to be compromising yourself because at some point you're going to have to make somebody else happy over you.
Yeah. It's life's complicated. And I'm just, we've talked about the younger people. I mean, I can't imagine what I would be like as a kid because I have dear friends that have like teenage kids and I see them, having to go to therapy and like for me, I mean, I've never been to therapy, but maybe I should. I don't know. But like the fact that young people are going to therapy for, anxiety and when they're 14, 15, it's like, man, I had a shitty like high school. I was the fat kid. I was picked on. So maybe if it was now, I'd probably be going to therapy, but I didn't have that. So I wonder if it's almost like analysis by paralysis. And then maybe you fall into this too because you read so many personal development books. Like, oh wait, let me read some of this. Let me read some of that. And a CEO told me the worst day of the year for his employees was when he got back from vacation because they wondered what personal development book he read on his vacation
during the process
and what he's going to want to put in action. So how do you deal with like all this knowledge? Because one of the running jokes I always have is our brains were not made for this much information. We have way too much information at our fingertips. And like these generations, and I'm even going to Gen Alpha, like they're still not made for the amount of information that we can have access to. So how do you deal with it? Because it sounds like you read a lot, you follow a lot of folks that are very influential, but like, how do you take all that information in and then process it and turn it into something that you can use day to day?
So I think this is the area that I want to help younger people sort of as, I talk about creating these curriculums and being self-learners, and there's so much data out there, but there's a limit to that. And actually action has to come out of all of that, right? So for me, it's been a life journey as a multi-potentialite, which is, there was a big TED talk about this, many years back, of someone that is so the master of many things, but not really the master of anything in particular. And I think that's always been my biggest problem, that I'm capable and able in a lot of different areas. And sometimes it's hard to pick one. And so the way that I'm sort of looking at my world now is I spent a lot of time with a book called The Essentialist. And this book sort of talks about really focusing on the things that matter the most to you. So I have spent now since COVID really writing down and flushing out, what are the things that make me happy? Who are the people that are truly the ones I want to be, that I want in my life? What do I sort of visualize as the next, call it 5, 10 years? You need to sit and do that work in order to synthesize and to sit down and slow down enough to actually answer those questions well is rarely done by any of us. And so I've been asking those questions now for a bit, and it's sort of led me down to this narrowed version of still a lot of things, but they all kind of work in unison, right? So as we do this investment into different types of companies, I can also do consulting and actually help them grow and develop their thesis, because I'm taking my learnings from building companies, investing in companies, and I enjoy it very much, as I still do my trading, because I actually love the procurement, and it actually helps some of the companies that I'm working with, and in addition to working with my family. So it all kind of fits together, where I'm not getting off script anymore, but it took me a really long time to figure out, how does this fit into this that can later let me feed into something else? Because I saw this movie once called The Big Little Farm, and it was about regenerative, sort of self-sustainable organisms. I want my life to be balanced in a way that it can feed itself from personal to work. I don't want to have that juggle of work-life balance. I want a balanced life. And that's how I'm approaching synthesizing all the things that I'm studying and then ranking them. Say, like, sometimes I just have an interest in quantum physics. Do I want to live my life in quantum physics? Probably not. I've learned the basics of quantum mechanics, quantum physics, that helps me apply it to science and how I see the world and technology. But it's not necessarily what I want to be doing every day. There is a part of health that for me is very important. And those are sort of the pillars that I'm building into my life now. Because I work in food, can I do good in food as I work in this space and also help that health and wellness movement? So now it's about tying pieces together that can live in one sort of stable organism versus things that are disjointed, and sometimes that toggle is a bit uncomfortable.
It sounds like you would do wonders on Jeopardy. Like, you have enough knowledge to be dangerous on many different subjects.
It's annoying for some, because it's sort of friends, family, significant other, they all sort of joke where they're like, if she says that she's early to it and she's right, but it's about just, I absorb a lot of knowledge and I don't get sucked down by it. And I think that's the hardest part in the world we live in, Joe. These kids think that what they see in their screens is their entire world. Their entire world is the moment they look up outside and see the world. And so it's that toggle is very important. And I'm trying to do more action. And that's why I'm doing more podcasts, coming out of the world, because I think now it's time to sort of implement the things I've learned, because sometimes it's hard and you want to boil the ocean because you're interested about so many things, but really being pointed about a curriculum that can help tie things together is I think the more holistic approach that we need in life, less extreme.
That's awesome. I love that. And so the only award I think I've ever won was my grammar school lip sync contest. I did Born in the USA, Bruce Springsteen. But you were named one of the most influential women in mid-market M&A by Mergers and Acquisitions magazine. Tell me about what that honor meant to you, because that led up to, all the stuff we've been talking about sort of led to that moment. So tell me about what that honor meant for you.
It was a big deal for me because I was the youngest person to be named in that role. And I didn't come from a traditional background. I mean, as I told you, Joe, I started in this industry not knowing what EBITDA was. They didn't want to hire me at Audex. So we don't know where to put you. And I called every day for 6 months, this person, Jay Jester, who was, people that know him, that know middle market, know him very well. And he was just sort of like, just come join us. We'll give you a trial. And that trial led to being hired within a month, where people said, like, it's like you've been here always. And they said, well, I would never do anything really, outward facing. And then I became one of the faces of the firm because I learned all these things. So it really taught me so much to sort of go through this process of being at the highest level of finance and pushing my way in a way where people said, no, and believing in myself. And winning that award was sort of that pat in the back to self of, the Spanish girl who doesn't, always had difficult with math. It's named an award that, most people could, would love to even be considered for, in the hardest city in the world to do deals, in a space that is predominantly men and white men. And so it was one of those things, because I did it on my own. I mean, I had a lot of help along the way from my peers, but I wasn't a finance family. No one handed it to me. And it was extremely validating to be seen.
That's awesome. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. And, let's wrap things up by talking about the current world of M&A, because I've talked in the past on the podcast about this silver tsunami, these boomers that are, coming to the end of their sort of, active work life. Not that I'm putting them out the pasture or anything like that, but, they're at that point in their life where if they don't have children that are going to inherit a company or, have someone they can hand things off to, that they're looking to be acquired by someone. And I know this is sort of like high time for it. Like there's thousands and thousands of baby boomers retiring like every day. So tell me about that world of M&A and how the boomers are fitting into this.
For me, I think this is a culmination of all the things I've done. Like to be right place, right time. We spent, Audax was, family-owned businesses 101. This is where we spent the majority of our time. And coming from a family-owned business, having now worked with many, it is very interesting to see the inflection point of these boomers and also where the capital markets are today, right? Where private equity is, where a lot of them got away with force majeure clauses and not meeting sort of the fund mandates during COVID because obviously there was a pandemic, but those excuses are only going to last for so long. Money is not going to be cheap anytime soon. And the boomers and family-owned businesses, they now understand how private equity works. They now know the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between. So they're not dummies. So for someone like me that understands a private equity toolkit, really loves working with family and businesses because, gosh, my dad and I have a lot of fun together now, and really has the capital strategy. I can come in and really help before they go to a private equity firm, before they have those conversations, because we are the same. I've lived it. I live it. It's hard to transition family members out. It's scary. Everybody's scared of debt. Every single family-owned business looks at debt like, oh my gosh, we're out of money. And it's interesting to educate them in ways that the private equity guys just aren't doing, because they usually send much younger kids to these facilities and they're trying to teach a CFO that's been in there for 15 years. And it's a kid that graduated from Dartmouth maybe like 4 years ago, teaching them that the numbers don't fit in the model. That structure is not working anymore for a lot of families. And most families already know what's going to happen. So it's a very interesting time for new models, for families like myself and the partners that we have to come in and sort of drive value in unique ways, because we can be dynamic. And I think that's the essence of the market today. If you don't have the ability to be nimble because you're stuck on specific returns, specific fund exits or raises, it makes it hard because you're stuck between a rock and a hard place in a very conflicted environment.
Wow. And, I always feel like with folks approaching private equity for the first time, again, as this outsider, I always feel like they have this ulterior motive where family-owned businesses may be like, hey, I want my business to live on past me. But private equity doesn't think about it like that. They're like, what can I take from that company, get rid of everything else, and I'll move it into something else. What do you say to folks that are worried about something like that in the private equity world?
But that's the thing. Private equity it's not that they don't care. It's that they're not built that way. The actual model itself, like if we just call a spade, Joe, there is an investment period, there is a hold period, and there's an exit period. It has to fit within this model. If it doesn't fit into the model, you can't be part of the fund. And so they can tell you very beautiful things in order to get you to sell to them. But the reality is they're not going to maybe keep all those family members in the business once they buy it. They're not going to keep the plant in the location that you wanted just because that's where your childhood home is. They're not going to come in and keep everybody on payroll because it doesn't fit the numbers in the model. Why? Because if you're an add-on for a business, they need to take what's good and get rid of the bad because it doesn't fit into the overarching business. And if you're the platform business, they need to clean you up enough to keep bringing on more companies. And so the models don't quite work as it relates to the coddling of families post-acquisition unless you get, there are a few, evergreen type of funds that are precluded from needing to force you to sell or to do things because it doesn't fit into a model. And that's why I think for us, family offices, it's a very ripe environment because we can be flexible. Maybe it's a partnership first, and then maybe you sell control, and then maybe you exit fully once we've all done, some things together. And so that's the difference between the old models where people didn't really know the opaque nature of private equity, and now they're much more akin to it. The financing market, because money is no longer cheap, and funds needing to hit returns based on fund mandates so they can keep raising funds. So it's a very complex environment. And it's the same for VC. Look, SoftBank made a lot of plays. Growth was one of them. It didn't work. And a lot of VCs followed on that, and it didn't work. And so a lot of people are licking their wounds in the early stage space because growth models, for the most part, are complicated unless they figure out a way to make money, which most don't.
Yeah, it's funny, and I know this is not it's analogous to a certain extent, but like Wall Street for many, many years, and I talk about this on the last podcast. It was about companies' growth, profits. Don't worry about it, grow, just spend, grow, and then I don't know. One day, Wall Street, the person in Wall Street woke up and said, "Yeah, no, I don't care about growth. I want profits." How, as someone who was in your space, like manage that? Like we're like, wait a minute. The world wanted one thing. They wanted growth on Monday, but on Tuesday they want profit. How does an entrepreneur, business owner, like survive in that world? Again, going back to the fact that I say you entrepreneurs are nuts. Like, how do you guys all manage that?
So we're all totally nuts, but the difference between me and most entrepreneurs is two things. Family-owned business, you try to de-risk at every turn, right? You're trying to have structure because, again, you said it at the beginning of the podcast, there might not be money coming in because you have to build, you have to make that, you have to build it, you have to create the machine. And so you're just much more risk averse. That's one. And so you look at ways to create money without spending, right? And then two, I come from the middle market private equity world downstream into VC and entrepreneurship. And so for me, the hardest thing was VC, where I was like, guys, the numbers we're putting in the model are all fake. Like, there's no founded financials, historical record in this business being able to hit these numbers. Like, how do we get comfortable? And they would say, it's fine. You kind of generally have these models where it's more of an art than a science. I was like, this is not an art or a science. It's just a bunch of numbers that make no sense. So for me, it was the opposite. As the model shifted, I was like, thank God that now people are focused on profits, because that to me is where it makes sense. Because if you're building and building and raising and don't have a path to profitability, you're just trying to outrun yourself. And that to me, it doesn't work. It's just too risky.
And it probably drives you crazy more than me, but like smart people buy into that. I remember like 4 years ago, I interviewed the co-founder of Netflix, and for whatever reason, like he was big into NFTs and all these like technologies that like we all laugh about now. But at the time, I'm a big Disney stock owner because I work my radio station was owned by Disney for many years. So it always drove me crazy during like the 2020s about the Disney's stock was all resting on how many subscribers Disney Plus was getting. So I stated as like, hey, I don't get it. I'm a Disney stock owner. I see that our parks are filled. We put out a blockbuster every quarter. Why is our stock going down? This makes no sense. He goes, no, it makes a lot of sense for, the subscriber growth to be there. And I'm like, you founded Netflix. You don't see the problem with this? How do you handle it when you run into these brilliant people who buy into these, well, now the old way of growth at all costs? Who cares about profits? Like, how did you deal with that? Because it sounds like you have that Latin passion that I do too. It's like, did you like bang your head against the wall and be like, what are these people doing?
I banged my head against the wall. I looked at some of the best businesses and I looked at sort of the Amazons of the world and I was like, oh my gosh, they don't make money. ASW makes money, but without it, Amazon would just be bleeding. And so I think there is a level of madness when you're at like the sort of WeWork, Amazon level that you kind of you're betting more on this individual who's got this crazy vision that you're praying will actually be able to execute. But those are complete outliers. They're not the norm. And so if everybody tries to be the next Amazon, it's not going to work, because I think there has been a diminishing return once you kind of hit that next layer where it hasn't been working. Maybe it worked for a little bit. And so when I see these people now, I say, okay, is it somebody that knows something I don't? Do they have a track record of actually doing something so insane that they pull it off? And then you do bank on those people because they're the anomaly. But for the majority, I say, look, call me when you've managed to actually, get a lot more traction in your cap raising, and then maybe we'll discuss. Because for that, it's really about who's backing somebody like this. Is our investor sort of syndicate going to be comfortable with something like this? Let's see who's coming in and how are they getting comfortable, and then maybe you start making some calls where maybe they know something we don't. But we stay very far away from people that are just focused on pure growth, because you're putting money in the fire. There's just too many unknowns in the world we live in today for us to ever be comfortable with just pure growth plays anymore.
Love it. All right. I'm going to put you on the spot to wrap this up, Astrid. So you have a lot of irons in the fire, a lot of things going on in the world. What's your next big swing? What do you want to do next? What's the next big, when you step up to the plate where you're just going to let it rip no matter what pitches coming your way? Do you have something on your mind right now?
So we've been working for 6 years on a technology that you wouldn't find anywhere on my LinkedIn. I barely talk about it. It's a predictive tech that we've been spending a lot of time on. It's a subsector of AI. It's swarm technology, and we're being very under the radar for a lot of reasons because it's very powerful. And we're taking big bets in technology. This brings a layer of consciousness into tech that AI doesn't have, so it's complementary. So we're really excited about what we can do in terms of predictions in this very dynamic world where most predictive models are broken, given the interconnectedness of everything around us. So that is sort of our next bet, alongside, continuing to do investments with these boomers reaching age, is really focused on technology, automation, and bringing in this into sort of everything we do.
Awesome. Her name is Astrid Soto. Astrid, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Joe. It was a pleasure.
And that'll do it for another Forbes Books podcast. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify and hit subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes. You can always connect with me on X, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Joe Pardavila or TikTok at J Pardavila. And please don't forget the golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.